It's a big schus for me to be back each year, to be able to speak to the summer group, the summer Torah, on behalf of the Agudas Yisrael of America. And I'm grateful to the hundreds that came out. There's a lot of things that you could be doing, and instead you come to hear the word of Hashem and or to get chizuk from each other. For that, I'm deeply grateful. And as I have the privilege of doing every year, I want to single out Mrs. Ackerman. She definitely deserves an extraordinary... I honestly don't think that the people who are here fully comprehend, both in quantity and quality, how much work she puts in. It's a very big deal to orchestrate multiple speakers, especially if they're busy people and they can be in different parts of the world doing different things. But her attention to detail and to making sure that there's a successful program of Summer Torah is something that's extraordinary. And everyone owes you a tremendous, tremendous debt of Hakaras HaTov. The Rabbi Shalom should repay you and the entire mishpacha to be able to continue Gesundheit. When I started, I said that it's a privilege to be back. I think we're doing this many years. But the truth is, it's not such a privilege to be back. And I don't mean that in a humorous way. If we're back again, and we're approaching Tisha B'Av, that means it's yet another one in Golus. To come together for shiurim of different types of inspiration, that's wonderful. But to be back again as we approach Chodesh Menachem Av, that's not something we should be proud of. For the last few weeks I've been mentioning, and I'll say it, and I apologize if some feel uncomfortable. It's certainly not my kavana. Some have a terrible attitude, or should I say approach, towards the 3 weeks. They'll look at the calendar and they'll almost say, when are the 3 weeks going to be behind us? Like this, just, here I am enjoying vacation, a lot of restrictions. It's just so much easier to go after the 3 weeks, and then things just go back really to normal. The restrictions, the limitations, everything is lifted, and then things are, that's a terrible approach. The Rabbi Shalom did not give someone the 3 weeks, and then Chodesh Menachem Av, and then the 9 days to just look beyond it, to just say, well, if I could just flip the calendar a few weeks past, because really the limitations and the restrictions, it's just not in sync with what I want to do in the summer and how I want to feel, especially when I'm relaxing and enjoying. So I just really want to get past it so I can go back to what? To another year in Golus? And so if hearing those words make us feel a little bit uncomfortable, that's a good thing. We should be shouting, letting the Rabbi Shalom know that in Golus, it's unbearable. Because if we're giving over the aura and the impression, yes, it's hard, but we're managing. So if you're managing, you don't need to leave. These are the facts. If the Rabbi Shalom just hears messages from us, well, it's hard, but we're doing okay. A little difficult, but we're managing. And besides, I'm in the middle of construction, so it would be really an inconvenient time for all of us to pick up and just leave. How about if we came together and we would shout to the Rabbi Shalom, it's unbearable. We can't take it anymore. And yeah, we'll finish whatever construction we're doing in Eretz Yisrael. The Jerusalem stone is beautiful, believe me. Maybe that's where we have to begin. So it's nice to be back, but not for this reason. How much Mrs. Ackerman would appreciate running an event in Yerushalayim with the Gula Shalema on different settings, circumstances. It is a terrible, terrible approach and attitude. Let's get by the 3 weeks, let's make it best Israel, and then we can breathe easier. Really? Sometimes we find ourselves, we're doing okay. How about if this year we really came together to tell the Ribbono Shel Olam, we can't bear this? Let the Ribbono Shel Olam hear that message, and Be'ezras Hashem, already this Tisha B'Av, let's be rejoicing b'chutzos Yerushalayim. As you heard a moment ago, the title, What It Takes to Be a Winner. Let's start with the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. While we could spend the entire time talking about it, let's focus on one part. The invitation was supposed to be given by the messenger of the one making the feast to Kamsa. And a mistake was made, and it was given instead to Bar Kamsa. Then why does the Gemara in Gittin, Daf Yomi just had it, say that responsible for the Churban was both Kamsa and Bar Kamsa? Kamsa didn't do anything. Bar Kamsa is the one who showed up to the feast. So why are we mentioning Kamsa as well? That's a well-known question. Additionally, let's analyze this story. Sefer Mosakar brings it down. I think it's extraordinary. From the vantage point of Bar Kamsa, what did Bar Kamsa do wrong? When he got the invitation to the feast by the Baal Simcha, he didn't know that it was a mistake. He didn't know that it was really intended for Kamsa. So when he got that personally delivered invitation, he thought, amazing. He wants to make amends. Let bygones be bygones. And he got dressed and went to the feast all excited. Now, if that's the case, really when he walked in, the first thing he should have done, again, keep in mind that as far as he knew, he didn't know that it was a mistake. He thought it was a genuine extension and an invitation for peace. So when you walk in now to the Baal Simcha, the first thing you should do, Bar Kamsa, is go over to the Baal Simcha and say, I'm so grateful, thank you for willing to move on, making amends. That's not what he did, he sat down. But if you think it's go over. And then everything starts to unfold because the Baal Simcha came over and said to Bar Kamsa, what are you doing here? It was at that point that what registered in Bar Kamsa's head? Oh, it was a mistake. You meant it for Kamsa, not for me. But Bar Kamsa, I don't understand. Up until a moment ago, you were willing to come, you were ready to be Mavata, you were ready to end the Machlekes, you were ready to move on. So now you happen to have found out that it was a mistake and that it was intended for Kamsa and not for you. But you're there. You're at the table, as Avi Mizach. You already came? So why not, once you're already there, say, I want to be a winner. Let's just move on. It's just not worth it. What are we, crazy? Instead, realizing it was a mistake, he digs his heels in and he starts offering. Let me stay and I'll pay for this. Let me stay and I'll pay for half the chasna. Let me stay and I'll pay everything. What may have amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars. A person is willing to lose hundreds of thousands of dollars and a hain rav of their wealth, abi not to say, I'm sorry. Be not to say, but you already came. You thought, and now you found that it was slightly different. But you're there, you're ready. So just say the words. I'd rather give up all the money. Be not to say I'm sorry. So what did Kamsa do wrong? Zok the Marsha. What was the relationship between Kamsa and Bar Kamsa? In Aramaic, Bar is a son. Zok the Marsha, Kamsa was Bar Kamsa's father. Bar Kamsa was his son. Based on that Marsha, that it was a father and a son, perhaps we could say, where did Bar Kamsa get this from? The inability to move on? The inability to say, I'm sorry, and to be mevater. Where did he get this from, so ingrained within him, that I will give up all my money, I'll lose a hoin rav, I'll be not to say, I'm sorry. Vaistais, he must have seen that in the home. A home where it was so rigid, where sorry was not part of the lexicon. Being mevater didn't exist. And maybe that's why Kamsa the father is faulted as well. A Kamsa ubar Kamsa, because of a father and a son, and poor chinuch, where you don't teach your children the art of being mevater, the art of moving on, the art of saying I'm sorry. Kamsa and bar Kamsa are responsible for the churban. That's a way to raise a child? Whether it was an outward message or subconsciously do everything abina to say I'm sorry? And if that's what caused the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, it behooves us. If you already came, we already came, we're gathering for yet another Chodesh Menachem Av. What to do to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash? You know, in Lashon HaKodesh, there are two words for wall. You'll find either the word chayma or kir. What's the difference between the word chayma and kir? They both mean a wall. Etymologically, the root of the word chayma is chamimus, warmth. The root of the word kir, kar, cold. Mayrai v'Rabbi, are we building chaymais or are we building kirais? When you build a kir, you build a wall of cold, apathy, a wall of indifference, a wall of I'm here, you're there, stay out. Walls of machlokes. In fact, if you take a look at Parshas Tazria Mitzayra, where was the tzaras found for one who spoke Lashon Hara? Sometimes on the person, sometimes on their clothing, or in the wall of their home. How does the pasuk refer to the wall? Kirais habayis, kirais habayis. Because that's what happens with Lashon Hara. You destroy relationships. You defame people. You shatter partnerships and shidduchim and communities. It's not a joke. But then we have a chayma. A chayma is a wall of chamimus, of warmth, a wall of inviting in, a wall of vitor, a wall of slicha, a wall of, let's just move on. Maybe that's the pshat when the Sefer Torah is taken out and we say the Vayhi ben Sayah. How do those words end? Tivne chaymais Yerushalayim. Now literally it means to rebuild the walls of Yerushalayim. Perhaps we could say Tivne chaymais. If we'll learn to build chaymais, then Yerushalayim. So maybe what this gathering is all about on behalf of the summer of Torah, the concept of being a winner, where does that concept come from? It comes from something we mentioned a number of years ago. It's well known that Rav Shach, Moran Rashke Bahag, Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh Levroch, at over the age of 100, he would say, this is a quote some of you are writing, and if not, write it on the blackboard of your heart. Rav Shach used to say, at over the age of 100, I never met a person who was mevater that didn't win. And I never met someone who wasn't mevater that didn't lose. After 100 years of leading and guiding and counseling and advising Klal Yisrael, hear the words that Moran Rav Shach would say. I never met somebody who wasn't mevater and didn't win, or who wasn't mevater and didn't lose. Because when you're mevater, you're a winner. It's not always so easy. And sometimes it could be extremely difficult. But Rav Shach testified, was made, when you're mevater, you're a winner. So what are we going to teach our children? The art of vitor, the art of chayma, the art of shalom, the art of getting along? Or, no, in our family we build kirais. In our family, we will give up all our money and all of our relationships, and we will have a miserable, days won't be days, night won't be nights. Abi, not to say, I made a mistake. And even if you don't think you're in the wrong and made the mistake, but if it will bring about a ribuy of shalom, sometimes we hear this topic and it seems so obvious, and as many of us are hearing these words, we're processing one of two things. Either, oh yeah, I hope Yenim, I hope she's listening because it's mamish for her to hear. Or, I know what he's saying is true, but in my case it's too difficult, it's not applicable. Are you sure about that? Are you mamish convinced everybody's case is the one that's the exception? You know, like how does the Yetzer Hara get us? I know you're not supposed to speak Lashon Hara, I know that. But about her, it's mamish a mitzvah. If you would know, it's mamish a mitzvah. So you're sure that your case is zicher and avada, the exception to the rule? Who's saying that? The Yetzer Tov or the Yetzer Hara? Are we building chaymais or are we building kirais? I want to tell you something. There's an extraordinary pshat from the Chassam Sofer, and I actually had the privilege to write up this Dvar Torah and the story that it will follow for the upcoming issue in the Hamodia newspaper. There's the Inyan magazine. Every number of weeks, 6 or 7, I have the privilege of writing a Torah article. So for next week, for Chazayin, if we're Chalila is still in Golus. And by the way, that's a real way we should train ourselves to speak. Really the entire year. But at the very least, during the 3 weeks, train ourselves to say. Recently, I read a Maisa. Going back 100 years ago, one of the Gedolim witnessed that one lady said to the other, "What did you make for lunch today?" So she answered, "For lunch I prepared beans. I prepared beans for the family." And the other woman said, "And what are you making for lunch tomorrow?" She says, "No, I'll tiftach peh. Tomorrow? You're talking about tomorrow?" If Chalila Mashiach is not here by tomorrow, then I'm making potatoes. Let's train ourselves to speak that way. Let's train ourselves to realize, Achak Eloi b'chol yom sheyavoi. And so this article is for the Inyan magazine of Chalila. Next Shabbos is Shabbos Chazayin, still in Golus. So if you hear it now and read it then, you'll be one step ahead of the game. But Moirai v'Rabbeis, I listened to a pshat. Heilig Chassam Sofer Zechusa Yagan Aleinu. This is the pshat. Believe me, this is the pshat. Don't listen. Open your hearts to this pshat. A few weeks ago in Parshas Kairach, we read that when Moshe Rabbeinu attempted to get Kairach to end his rebellion on the Machlokes, it was unsuccessful. So Moshe Rabbeinu then went to Dasan and Aviram to get them to try to end the Machlokes. Zokt Rashi, from the fact that he was unsuccessful with Kairach, but didn't give up, and he still went to Dasan and Aviram, Zokt Rashi, Mikan, from here we learn, She'ein machzikin b'machlokes, which means that you don't allow a machlokes to persist, but you do what you can to end it. And although the attempt with Kairach wasn't successful, he continued trying with Dasan and Aviram. Why? Let's say the 3 words again. Let's mamish ingrain it and place it on the deepest level in our heart. She'ein machzikin b'machlokes. You do what you can to end the machlokes. Says the Heilig Chassam Sofer, the word machazikin is rooted in the word chazaka, What does chazaka mean? In many things in halach and Jewish law, we apply the concept of chazaka. Many areas of halacha, we apply this concept of chazaka. Chazaka basically tells us that if something is currently or was in the past, we assume the status quo. There's a chazaka, it will continue. You know, there are many areas of halacha that we apply this concept of chazaka, which basically works, as I told you a moment ago, when something has a past history and a current status quo, chazaka says that in all likelihood that's the way it will continue in the future. Says the Heilig Chassam Sofer, the word machzikin we just said comes from the word chazaka. And now Rashi's telling us, when it comes to machloikes and to arguments, ein machzikin b'machloikes. There's no such thing as chazaka when it comes to machloikes. Maybe in areas of halacha you apply the concept of chazaka. There's a status quo, it'll continue. There was a past history, it tells me about the future. Says the Chassam Sofer, when it comes to machloikes, ein machzikin. There's no such thing as the concept of chazaka, because no matter how bitter, how deep, how long, how entrenched, how much you might have thought, how could this machloikes end? There's a chazaka. No, don't say those words. Ein machzikin b'machloikes. When it comes, hear deeply what the Chassam Sofer is saying. When it comes to machloikes, there's no concept of chazaka, but the past history, but for decades, but the current status quo, but no. There's no chazaka. I shared this a number of years ago in a particular city, this Chassam Sofer. And I only found out after, and this is the vort and the story I told you I wrote for next week's column. There's no chazaka when it comes to machlekes. Don't tell me, but in this many years and so deeply entrenched. I didn't know till after I spoke a number of years ago that there were two families that were in the audience listening. And they had, unfortunately, after having been dear friends decades earlier, they were involved in a machlekes of over 40 years. That's a long time, 40 years. And they heard the words, Ein machazikin b'machloikes, there's no chazaka, there's no chazaka, there's no chazaka when it comes to machloikes. People can change. Issues can change. And they took it to heart. And I was told a number of years ago, when I said this, right after the event, someone kept me on top of the situation. The two families took it to heart, and after more than 4 decades of a machlekes, they proved ein machzikin b'machlekes. And they ended the fight, they both became winners, and Baruch Hashem, like almost from half a century earlier, a beautiful relationship flourished once again. The end of the Maisa, I only found out a bit later. When one of the parties involved was getting ready to make that shalom, to be mevater, to move on, to build a chayma, not a kier, to give proper chinuch, not kamtzu bar kamtza. This family member had a granddaughter who had been in shidduchim for a number of years, and for whatever the reasons were, not successful, not having been read a shidduch. And when this family member was ready to be mevater, to move on, to make shalom, to build a chayma, it was with a tefillah to the Ribbono Shel Olam. Please let it be as a schus that my granddaughter can do a shidduch. Ma'isa shahaya kachaya. On a weekday afternoon, a number of years ago, the two parties made shalom. That evening, the granddaughter got read a shidduch, after having not had a phone call for many years, a number of years, I should say. And a few weeks later, the granddaughter was engaged, and there was a chasna and a kala. And from the Vort, the two families called me, and I mamish heard, like everyone, the two families, I don't mean to say that they were mashadach with each other, meaning the kala, that would have been, maybe the next time I say it, we'll say it that way. I mean to say that the two families were once again celebrating together like they used to. And I mamish heard the excitement in the background. I'm pretty sure I also heard one of the men say, hang up quickly before he munch shatchanas. Hang up before he asks for shatchanas. I think I heard that. I don't know. Rabbi say, ein machzikin b'machloikes. So if you're hearing the words that are coming out of my mouth, and we want to do our share to make sure that Tisha B'Av becomes a Yom Tov, remember, there's no chazaka when it comes to machlokes. But my case and my situation, let's try to build a chayma. Let's try to rebuild Chaymos Yerushalayim. As I said, it's not always so easy, but Moran Rav Shach told us, when you're mevater, when you could say those words, I'm sorry, when you could move on, when you could mend the relationship, the person is clearly a winner. Do we have this? Do we have the power? It's a big tall order. It is. About 10 or 12 years ago in the summer, there was a tour to Iceland. It was not a tour that I led. It was not a Jewish tour. There was a tour to Iceland. There was a middle-aged Asian woman who was a non-Jewish woman, part of the tour. And for the first part of the tour, she was dressed in black, elegant clothing. And then there was a break in the day for the excursion to begin, let's say an hour or two later. Now, before you go from one excursion to another, one of the most important things to do on any tour is to make sure that everybody's accounted for. And so, everyone started to make sure that everybody was present. Now, this middle-aged Asian woman, who for the earlier part of the day was dressed, as I told you, in the black elegant clothing, the excursion in the afternoon was going to be something of a very different nature. So she now changed into lighter, more casual type clothing. Perhaps white, yellow, whatever it was. And now it came for everybody to look for the person and make sure that they're there. And everybody looked, and no one could find the Asian woman dressed in the black elegant clothing. Now you can't go on if somebody's missing. So everybody started with an unusual search for the middle-aged Asian woman as they remember the dark, elegant clothing. Everyone looked for her, including she herself. I kid you not. You're more than welcome to research the story. I believe it was August 12th, 2000, August 30th, 2012. I believe that's the exact date. You're more than welcome to see it yourself. She looked for herself because she was looking for someone. She didn't recognize the description. She forgot that she changed the clothing, and she saw the casual, sportier clothing. She didn't realize. She forgot. So she looked for herself. And I don't know, the search lasted multiple hours till the middle of the night. And then she realized, oh, they mean me. So she had the unenviable task of going to the authorities and saying, I found me. I found me. And they asked her, lady, how is that possible? How is it possible that you didn't? She said, I didn't recognize the description. And I thought to myself, maybe some of us are like that Asian woman. Maybe sometimes we don't recognize our own description. And sometimes we don't look for ourselves for hours, but a lot of our lifetime could come and go. Oops, I just didn't recognize that description. Because there's a real description out there of what a world with peace and shalom and a chayma and vitor and relationships, a real world that could look like, and things that we could accomplish. We're bigger than that, we're better than that. But sometimes we just don't recognize the description. And it's a lot easier just to fall back and say, well, there's a chazak and a status quo that it's been this long and this many years, impossible. Ein machazikin b'machloikes. Ein machazikin b'machloikes. And so that description of a world of a chayma, a world of peace, a world of shalom, a world of relationships, a world where people it's a real description. Please don't suffer from what the Asian woman did, where days come and go, years come and go, and you just didn't recognize that description. I know the mice I'm about to say, I've said on behalf of the Summer of Torah in the past, but I think now it's so critical to be repeated. If indeed we have the ability to mend relationships, to bring people together, well, perhaps first, I'll mention something that I've said from my father's Zatzal Harav Mordechai Shapiro. It's so powerful. In Pirkei Avos it says that one of the miracles in the times of the Beis Hamikdash was oimdim tzefufim mishtachavim revachim, which literally meant that when we stood it was crowded, when we bent there was ample room. Now that's an unusual miracle, because if it's crowded when you stand, it should be impossible when you bend. Bending takes up more space, not less. My father Zatzal would say, oimdim tzefufim mishtachavim revachim. Oimdim tzefufim mishtachavim revachim is the basic ingredient in any relationship. Never forget these words. Oimdim. If you're going to stand your ground and be rigid, never capitulate, never be mevater, oimdim, you think that's a smart thing to do? Tzefufim, the relationship will be crowded and miserable. But mishtachavim, if you're willing to bend and you're willing to listen, you're willing to move on, then revachim. Then it could bring revach and beauty to that relationship. So what's it going to be, Rabbi Isai? Oimdim? I'm right, sure. Tzefufim. Or mishtachavim, revachim. We mentioned how, unfortunately, there was a situation where a husband and wife, they were for a little bit of time not speaking to each other. And the next morning, he had to get up at 5 a.m. to catch a flight to Dallas, but he wasn't going to go ahead and tell his wife, make sure that I'm up, because after all, he's not speaking to her. So he put a note on her pillow, you better make sure I'm up at 5 a.m. for my flight. The next morning, he woke up at 7:10. He missed his flight. He was ready to have a full-blown coronary. And he turns and he sees there's a note on his pillow that says, it's 5 a.m., get up. Oimdim tzefufim mishtachavim revachim. If we're just going to go ahead and be rigid, it'll be miserable. Mishtachavim revachim. The good news, as I said a few moments ago, is unlike the Asian woman, the description is a real description. It's something that we have the ability to do. And not only that, teach our children. Because if Kamsa and Bar Kamsa could have had that, then we could certainly do it. Mida Toiva Meruba. There's a pshat from the Radomsker Rebbe. It is one of the most powerful pshatim. I try to live with this pshat. There's a pasuk that tells us in Shir Hashirim, Hashmi'ini es koilech ki koilech orev. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, I'll listen to your voice because you have a sweet voice. Says the Heilige Radomsker Rebbe, Orev doesn't only mean sweet. What else does the word Orev mean? Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh. And Orev means to be responsible. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, Hashmi'ini es koilech. You want me to listen to your voice? Ki koilech Orev. Then you better have a voice of responsibility, of achrayus, of arevus, of caring one yid for another. That's the way to make sure Hashmi'ini es koilech. In fact, the Radomsker Rebbe continues, if I asked you which of the three avos best taught us this ability of arevus, of getting along, it would have to be Yaakov Avinu. Because by Yaakov Avinu amongst the Shvatim, and the Pasuk says, there was Sinna and Kinna, and at the end of the day, Yachad Shiftei Yisrael, who better than Yaakov Avinu taught us this ability to get along. Moray Rabbi say, what's the name of the tefillah that Avraham Avinu established? Shachris. What's the name of the tefillah that Yitzchak established? Mincha. And what's the name of the tefillah that Yaakov established? And don't answer Ma'ariv. Litvit, that's the right answer. Yaakov Avinu stellt avek the tefillah of Arvis. Arvis, getting along, moving on, the tefillah of Arvis. You might call the nighttime tefillah Ma'ariv, but perhaps one of the most important tefillahs is the tefillah of Arvis. In fact, might I say, the Gemara says that for women, you have to know different shitas, Ma'ariv might be a reshus, optional. I'm humbly suggesting Ma'ariv might be optional, but Arvis is a chayva, that's obligatory. No one has a right to end their day without asking, did I daven tfilas Arvis? There's no excuse for a person ending their day without being able, at least on one occasion, to account for tfilas Arvis. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, Hashmi'ini es koilech. I'll listen to your voice. Ki koilech orev, daven Arvis. Daven a tefillah of getting along, a tefillah of responsibility, a tefillah of building a chayma. That's the way to get our voice listened to. Hashmi'ini es koilech. Ki koilech orev. The power of speech. You know, in Pirkei Avos it says, Lefum tzara agra. Literally that means according to the reward, according to the effort is the reward. You want to hear one of the greatest pshatim? In Aramaic, what is pum? A pume is a mouth. Lefum, the power of the mouth is tzara. It can cause so much pain. Agra, it could bring so much reward. And sometimes at Chabmaira, we've been on the receiving end of both. Sometimes we might even be the one that caused our spouse, our parent, somebody who is a really good friend, a lot of tsar by my choice of words. Lefum, the power of the mouth is tzara. It could cause so much pain. Or agra, so much relief, reward, goodness. Hashivenu Hashem elecha v'noshuva chadesh yameinu kekedem. Kedem is spelled kuf daled mem. Rabbi say, you know what I think kedem kuf daled mem stands for? Kuf daled mem. Koidem dibor machshava. Before you speak, think. Do I really want to say these words? Just because I'm getting in that biting, sarcastic, facetious, cynical comment, that person cried themselves to sleep. But they didn't want to tell you. And what would be if you chose to say those words in 2 days, but not in the heat of the moment? Or if you chose to frame it a little bit differently? Koidem dibur, before you say the words, machshava, think. Chadesh yameinu kikedem. Maybe learning the art of thinking before we speak and repairing those relationships is the way to bring about the bayis shlishi, the power of speech. It can cause people so much tsar. It can cause people so much relief, goodness. They could feel like, life is indeed something so extraordinary. I want to focus on one nekuda before we start concluding about the power of speech and relationships. I once saw a sign that said, when I do something right, no one remembers. When I do something wrong, no one forgets. That's a despicable way to live. It's a terrible way to live. I want to change that sign. When someone does something right, never forget that tova. And they did something wrong, I'm going to try to move on. You want to hear a pshat from a dazekena mibali atoisvus? Listen to a pshat that's pile ployim. It'll change the way you view people and situations. The pasuk tells us, Basar treifa lekelev tashlichun oisai. You have a sheep that became a treifa because a wolf, ze'evim, they ripped it apart. So you know who gets the reward? You know who gets that Delmonico or that cowboy steak? Your dog. Basar treifa lekelev tashlichun oisai. You give the treifa, the sheep that became a treifa because it was ripped apart by the wolf, by the ze'ev, to your dog as a reward. Take a look at the Dazakeni Mibali HaTaisus. You're rewarding your dog. Why? Because you hired the dog to go ahead and protect the sheep from the wolves, and as a recognition and a thank you and a chorus atoiv to the dog, Basar treifa hakelev tashlicha naisai, you give the treifa of the sheep to the dog as a way of rewarding it and saying thank you and expressing your hakaras hatov that your dog did such a stellar job of protecting the sheep from the ze'ev and from the wolves. And the question is, what do you mean he did a good job? The whole way that the sheep became a treifa is because the dog didn't do a good job. That's how the sheep became a treifa. The wolves got to it. The dog messed up. It failed miserably. And you're rewarding it? The pshat of the Dazakeni Mibali Taisus is yes. Because there were so many countless times that your kelev did a good job and you probably didn't recognize it. And there are so many times in the future the kelev will do a good job and you may not recognize it. Zokta Dazakeni Mibali HaTaisus, precisely when the dog messed up, that's when you reward it. That's when you show your appreciation. That's when you are grateful. Why? Because of all the times in the past you probably didn't, and in the future that you may not. You forgot all those times? You forgot all that goodness? You forgot everything? Then when the dog messed up, that's the time to say thank you. I dare say, if that's the approach towards a kelev, kal v'chomer ben benoi shel kal v'chomer, towards our spouse, towards a parent, towards a friend, towards a relative, towards a fellow yid, all of a sudden, all of the goodness, all of the visits, all of the phone calls, all of the meals, all of the years, all of the tears, that's forgotten? If you have to reward the kelev, and precisely when it messed up, because you didn't properly recognize in the past and what probably will be, then what about us? All of the goodness that people do for us and on our behalves. All those 16 calls might have been made. Oh, but the 17th time that you didn't call, it grishes me. I can't let go. You used to be on one Mishloach Manos list. Now it's the C to D list. Oh, you think I'm carpooling with you? Oh, those days of carpool are over. Mishleach Monos, carpool, no invitations. If you have to be makir toiva to the kelev, what about to the people that are so extraordinary in our lives? And so, Meir v'Rabbi say, if we did have to have another Tisha B'Av talk this year, if the woman couldn't get out tomorrow's lunch without saying, no, al tiftach peh, then why can't we say, if Chalila, already next week's Tisha B'Av, let it be Karalai Maid, let's be rejoicing b'chutzas Yerushalayim, let it taka be a Yom Tif. But we have to do our part. There's no kamtza ubar kamtza. That's the chinuch we want to give our children? Rigidity? Give up all the money, give up our health, give up every relationship, abi not to say, I'm sorry. That's the lesson? We have to teach our children how to build chaymais. First ourselves, and our children will see. We're a people that build chaymais. We're someone that realizes the words of the Chasam Sofer, Ein machazikin b'machoikes. And if you're hearing these words, remember, there is no chazaka. The fact that there's been a status quo for 10, 30, 50 years is irrelevant, because by machoikes, anything is possible. Zokter Shach, if you're mevater, you're a winner. Let's not suffer from what the woman on that tour did, not recognizing the description. Believe me, there's a real description out there of a world of unity, of a Klal Yisrael that's ba'achdus, of relationships that are mended and repaired, of people getting along together. That's the true view of who we are. And let's remember, as the Balaturim told us, to show the appreciation. And now you're saying someone didn't do, and they disappointed, and you feel in your way that they fell short. Maybe that's precisely the time to remember all of the goodness. We should be zeicha to the bracha of the Radomsker Rebbe. Don't let a day pass where you don't daven tfilas arvis. I am responsible one for another. I am responsible to bring myself and others closer. We should be zeicha to the bracha. Hashmi'ini es koilech. Please, please, please listen. Listen to what I'm saying. Golus is unbearable. Let the Rebbeinu Shalom hear that kol. Ki koilech orev. A voice that davens tfilas arvis every single day. A voice that brings people together. And in that schus, let us take a merit. Tivne choymos, you build choymos, Yerushalayim. B'mheira b'yameinu, amen.